left to right. Russell Westbrook.
You love the Philadelphia Eagles. Let me get a hell yeah!
What's going on, guys? It is Deibs, Mr. Crockpot on Twitter. Welcome to Party on Broad. The Party on Broad podcast can be found on iTunes and Spotify. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. Today, we're going to talk some Flyers hockey. We're going to talk about, the coronavirus, how it's impacted the Flyers, and the Flyers have made some interesting signings over the past couple of weeks. Joining us today is Tyson. Follow him on Twitter at Quibell Tyson. He is our TPL hockey analyst here at the TPL YouTube channel, and make sure you check out his podcast, the TNT podcast, which covers everything from the NHL to the Philadelphia Flyers. Man, what's going on, Tyson?
And not much, just hunkered down like everybody else, watching a lot of television and other things like the poster behind my shoulder. So yeah, no, it's going all right. We're all healthy, so I'm thankful for that.
I fully agree, man. I'm stuck at home with my 7-month-old daughter, and we've just been crushing Disney Plus. Pretty much every movie, Star Wars movie, Avengers movie, Disney movie, you name it. That's pretty much what we've been doing. Luckily, we've been doing these podcasts. It's kind of given me some sort of sense of sanity to kind of like keep me going, because work-wise, like, we've moved to FaceTiming on the computer. So it's just been wild, man. How's your life with the coronavirus, man?
It's been similar. All work has been on Zoom, basically. An email for me, and then I have 3 kids, so we're in a 2-bedroom apartment, and in the heart of Chicago. So it's a little bit squirrely at times. So homeschooling now, my first grader, and they keep changing they just changed some laws, I guess, today, and so now it's going to be online for her on Instagram. So she's doing school on Instagram Live this morning. That's a first that I did not think would ever happen. Yeah. So it's just been same thing. I introduced my kids to DuckTales yesterday. Darkwing Duck is next on the menu.
My favorite.
Reliving my childhood. So yeah,
love it.
I think they mostly like it.
Love it. All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk some hockey. Let's talk some Flyers. The NHL was indefinitely paused on March 12th due to the coronavirus. Right now, I think there was like 2 members of the Avalanche and Senators that tested positive for the coronavirus. Then NHLPA will just basically closely monitor the situation. Dude, what was your initial reaction to the suspension of the regular season? And do you expect the season to eventually resume?
So I was actually surprised they did it as early as they did, just because NHL is notoriously slow. But on top of that, of the big sports franchises in North America, the NHL just makes the least amount of money, basically, usually. So for that reason, they obviously have some owners that are super, super wealthy, but at the same time, like, they need to make revenue for a lot of their smaller market teams. And so I know it was a decision that especially the smaller market teams like your Columbus Blue Jackets, even your Nashville Predators, who have done well and do make money, but it's one of those things where they need, like with the Predators, they need every dollar to stay afloat over the course of a year. So teams in those sort of markets just really, really feel it very, very quickly. So I was kind of surprised that they did cancel, but rule of thumb is Gary Bettman used to work for the NBA in the early 90s, long time ago. But rule of thumb is he kind of follows suit with the NBA sometimes on these sort of things when there's involved cancellations or weather issues. So I think once the NBA made that call, he was like, yeah, I think we got to make it too. So I'm glad they made it, obviously, when they did, because that was definitely a concern of mine for different people in the league as well. So that's a good thing. But in terms of the season, there's been a lot of talk of different options. So they're still discussing. There's some pretty crazy options. So one is they just want to jump straight to playoffs.
Wow.
So I've heard that. And actually, Sidney Crosby was on like a Zoom call or with media this past week, and he mentioned that he'd be okay with that. But as I said, of course he would, because he's not one of those bubble teams that was still expecting the next 12 games or so. They're maybe a point out right now to stay competitive. So it'd be hard. So they've also talked about maybe doing like 1 game playoffs before that to try to make that happen as well. They've talked about extending the season into late July. They've postponed the draft for as of now as well. And most insiders, like Elliot Freeman of Sportsnet, he said he thinks it's just going to be like the Crosby draft after the lockout, where basically they just did it on the computer. So a lot of people don't realize that, but the year that Crosby got drafted, it was just this crazy, 30-team lottery. Everyone had equal chance to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh got it, and basically Crosby was just standing in like an empty room, like waving, like more or less, and he got drafted. So that's what they're talking about doing potentially as well. And all those minor those leagues like the OHL, the WHL, NCAA, they all canceled completely everything. So they're usually done a lot earlier. I was just reading in Canada, the Memorial Cup, which is this big competition in Canada where the best teams from the Ontario Hockey League, the Western League, and the Quebec League all play against each other. It's been happening since 1918, so it actually survived the Spanish flu, and they were able to actually like run it in 1918, when the NHL was even canceled that year, and they canceled it this year for the first time in its history. So,
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of surreal, but they've even talked about it doesn't really matter, I guess, when they do the rookie draft now, because everybody's seasons are done. So there's nothing else to scout. There's nothing else to do. So you're just kind of looking at video, and eventually you'll just do it. So I think they're less concerned about that. But yeah, there's a bunch more options too they're talking about for the season, but it's pretty interesting.
What's your gut feeling, man? When do you think they could return? Like mid-May, late May? Like what's your vibe right now?
Well, the hard thing is you have different chunks of data that are affecting these sort of decisions. So I know for me, like I live in Chicago, they just turned the United Center where the Blackhawks play into what they're calling it like a coronavirus center hub.
True.
So basically they're using it for the whole city. They just took our big conference center downtown, McCormick Place, and the Army is in the process of turning it into a hospital. So I think we jumped 1,000 cases yesterday. So our numbers are we're in that surge that they keep talking about. So I know the governor of New York didn't predict an end to their surge. He doesn't think till the end of May. It's hard for me to think anything different from just being a regular person that's not anything medical related, just understanding a little bit of exponential math. It's one of those things where I just have a hard time seeing us, the NHL, coming back before early June, unless they find a way to do, unless they find a way, if there's enough of a decline, they find a way to do it without fans for a while. And they've discussed that too. They've discussed about just testing players, finding a way, hopefully they have tests by then, testing players before every game and coming back mid-May. But my gut says early June, or they're going to have to cancel. So, because then you run into situations where they don't start till October, but do you want to start pushing that back?
Right. Domino effect, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, and they had actually they just talked about actually moving the season start earlier, with then the end of the season starting earlier, because they don't like competing with the NBA playoffs either.
Right.
And then you can start getting into baseball season. So the NHL always tries to not put themselves in a position where they have to compete. I mean, opening day of baseball, usually there's maybe one game on an NHL schedule, like they understand, their marketing understands like where they stand in many ways on these things. So they don't want to compete. But yeah, that's my gut. We'll see.
Yeah, my reaction, like first and foremost, was just obviously a state of shock that all these sports are just kind of stopping, coming to a complete pause. But to be honest, like it wasn't the NBA being suspended. It wasn't baseball being pushed back. It wasn't team facilities or the draft being isolated in the NFL. It wasn't any of that. Man, my initial reaction, dude, it went straight to you, dude. My thoughts and prayers and all my heart went to, those Flyers diehard fans, man. And, all those guys that bleed orange and black, because you look at the state of the teams across Philadelphia, and if anything, the NBA, there could be a silver lining for the NBA being suspended. If it comes back, which I don't think it will. You have Ben and Joel getting fresh and healthy for a 7-game series. You have potentially Andrew McCutchen and Spencer Howard being ready, potentially if the Phillies season gets pushed back to like June or July. And then you have the Eagles, which they're the king of Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia is a football town. But then you get to the Flyers, man, and the way they were playing on offense, on defense, Carter Hart was playing out of his mind. The team was just gelling and had such a true identity. And I just felt so bad, man. It felt like the entire, like, to go back, like the Sixers season has been such a train wreck. And the Flyers were legit ready to take over the city, man. I don't know about you, but it was just so disheartening. And it was just brutal to see the Flyers season cut short, man. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it's pretty surreal. It's they're finally in this, after this kind of under Hextall, this rebuild stage where they were just, selling players for draft picks, and it was weird. They were kind of sort of saying it was the process, but not really at the same time, because they were semi-competitive. It was hard not to be. They weren't willing to part with Giroux. And so for that reason, and Couturier for obvious reasons, aren't going to part with either of those guys. But they just were in that weird space of being close to the playoffs, but not quite, not getting first overall picks. The closest being the Nolan Patrick pick a couple years ago when they did get the second pick. But other than that, they hadn't been in the basement yet. They'd been on that just outside bubble, weird place where you don't want to be in. And then very quickly with Fletcher being brought in to kind of expedite the process, and bringing in Niskanen and Kevin Hayes and Justin Braun, and just the emergence of Carter Hart and the emergence of these younger guys, Joel Farabee making the team as a 19-year-old, and just the depth even too is just exponential. It's just disappointing, because it's like, oh, here they are, they're competitive, they're ready to go. Oh, and literally people that love the underlying numbers, not just the wins and loss column. Like, I just went to Money Puck again for a second. So I think they did drop them to 2 now behind Vegas, just because they did some more. They've been able to deep dive more and find some things that they perhaps missed. But even so, number 2 in power rankings in the league, meaning first in the East, and their power ranking score is barely below. It's like just a percentage below Vegas. So in other words, they're like, in their minds, they're neck and neck in terms of underlying numbers, like expected goals and shooting percentage. They have the highest, like one of the highest shooting percentages in the league. Or they do have the highest shooting percentage in the league by 1%. So, I mean, and the crazy thing is, I don't know that it could go down. Even if it goes down, their defense is so good that it doesn't matter. So It's like, I'm right there with you. It's painful when it's like, oh, the Flyers are finally good again.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and we have to wait and
Right.
hope that other teams don't. Yeah, I was mentioning earlier, a lot of teams are going to benefit from this if they do come back that had injuries. So, like the Maple Leafs, for example, Jake Muzzin, one of their best defensemen, he broke his hand, was out 4 to 8 weeks. He'll be back. There's other teams with players in similar situations, players that have been dinged up, like a Crosby earlier in the year that had a surgery. Like, this benefits him to get back into shape, even more so than he was before. It benefits a lot of different teams. It's probably not a benefit to the Flyers outside of Nolan Patrick.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because the Flyers sit at 41, 21, and 7. They're 1 point behind the Caps in the Eastern Division. They were one of the hottest teams in the league before the suspension. Assuming the league does come back for whatever reason, whether it's a shortened regular season or a playoff, how does this situation impact the Flyers? And do you expect the Flyers to just kind of pick up where they left off?
It's hard to say. I know there's kind of 2 theories in hockey about momentum. One is that it just doesn't matter. It's like a game-to-game thing, because game-to-games are just so different. Some people are like, it makes no difference. Others are like, it has a huge amount of difference. There's not really a way to measure it, so we don't really know. I think I find myself somewhere in the middle, where I think it can absolutely help, especially if you're on a rebuilding team that's been in a rebuild. So if you're Giroux, Couturier, who've been through this all the way through, basically from the beginning of the rebuild till now, like, you are motivated to actually be winning, and you're motivated to have other players alongside you who are young and are skilled, and you're like, man, if I pass a puck to this dude, he actually like hits the net, or we actually gain possession versus in the past when I'm passing it to, I don't know, Dale Weiss, and Dale Weiss is shooting it the other direction. Like it's a very different situation. So I think in the case of the Flyers, motivation does matter and play in. But I think too, they have a strong veteran leadership group. I mean, they have Drew, they have JVR, they have Niskanen, they have Justin Braun. Braun's been in the Stanley Cup final. Niskanen's won it and been in the Stanley Cup finals with both Pittsburgh and Washington. Kevin Hayes has I believe he made a run with the Rangers his rookie year. So you got guys that have been there and have done it. And so for that reason, like, again, you can't really measure leadership quality either, but in a sense of like the next season or the next step of the season, if it happens, like relying on those guys is going to be key. And I know too, like they've talked a lot about how veterans are talking to the younger players and just being like, hey guys, here's how we're working out at home. Here's what we're doing. You know, don't just sit around eating Cheetos, watching Netflix. Like, let's make sure that we are ready. So there's a lot of that going on for sure. So
yeah. The Flyers made some interesting signings with some prospects. Let's get into it. Just a couple of days ago, the Flyers announced that they signed Wyatt Allison to an entry-level contract. What does this guy bring to the Flyers, dude? Yeah,
so he has kind of been referred to as Scott Hartnell Light.
Cool.
And so I'm sure Flyers fans like that idea. He's got a really like fun, strong personality, similar to Scott Hartnell.
Love it.
And he's big, he's strong. He has no problem just getting dirty in the corners, but he also can like put up some points too. So I don't think he will be in the NHL next season or when it picks up this year. He's a Lehigh Valley signing, but he has the potential to be like a third, fourth line NHL player. His main issue has been injuries. So I've been a big fan of his all along the way. He's been fun to watch. If you've ever found a way to watch NCAA games on ESPN, usually two. But he played 4 years at Northern Michigan for an old NHL coach. So he understands systems already, which is pro systems very much so already. So that's a good sign. But he has had just a ton of injuries. So lots of surgeries, knees, shoulders. So that's going to be his biggest detriment. He had been out for about half of this year already with those sort of injuries. So there was some talk that maybe the Flyers were concerned and maybe weren't going to sign him. So that even though they drafted him and he'd become a free agent in the summer and sign with another team, but it's definitely just worth the shot, honestly. I mean, I think he gets signed a 2-year. So they have 2 years to kind of see if he's injury riddled or not. They can make a decision in 2 years, hold on to him, and at the very worst, he's a decent player in the AHL.
It's amazing how loaded the Flyers are with depth and young talent, man. It is so wild. It was also announced that the Flyers signed Tanner Lozinski to a 2-year entry-level contract. What can you tell us about Tanner Lozinski, and what should Flyers fans expect from this guy?
Yeah, so I'm a Lozinski fan. Scouts are all over the map on him. He first kind of came on my radar, actually, I believe the year after he got drafted. And he made the U.S. World Junior team, kind of surprisingly. And he was just this penalty-killing, like, energy bug the whole tournament. So you just noticed him constantly. Just very tenacious forechecker. Reminded me a little bit of Zach Hyman at the time on the Leafs, who he's a player. Zach Hyman's a player that just wins like every puck battle. He's a fast skater, gets in the corner, doesn't take dumb penalties, and always comes out with the puck. So that's a similar kind of guy that Lozinski's been. He's been a captain for a couple of years at Ohio State. He's had really good offensive numbers, point per game. I think some scouts' main concern is his point totals. I don't think he's going to be a goal scorer or a real big point getter at the NHL level, but it's similar to a Wyatt Allison. Like, he could be an NHL player in the next year or so, easily enough, I think. And I think that he could have impact on special teams. And again, like, it's just another depth piece for the Flyers. I mean, I'm even just thinking of, like, next year on Lehigh Valley, like, how many first and second year players they'll have.
Yep.
Because they're probably going to have Isaac Ratcliffe back down there again. They still have Rubitsov down there. Vorobiev has been up and down. Those are guys that, like, Rubitsov is a first rounder. I mean, there's just guys that they have that are solid down there already, and they're about to add more. So they're about to have a loaded farm team with youth, as well as a loaded NHL team. Even just thinking of Morgan Frost likely being in the NHL next year.
Can the Flyers share some of that young talent to the Phillies farm system? Because the Phillies farm system freaking sucks, man. Like the Flyers are absolutely loaded with young talent moving forward, and you got to think about with like so much limited space on the roster moving forward, like Nolan Patrick, Lindblom, they're probably both returning at some point. Where do you think certain guys like Pitlick, JVR, Ghost, like what's the plan with those guys? Like those, you look at the Flyers like top two lines, they are pretty much set. You have Giroux, Couturier, Voracek, Farabee, Hayes, Konechny. Like that is awesome. And then what then you have all this young talent coming up. Like what do you expect to happen moving forward?
Yeah, I think they're in a good position because guys like JVR haven't lost their value. And I think a guy like Pitlick, they've actually increased his value. So he was pretty much a throw-in from Dallas when they traded Hartman, the Hartman thing in the offseason. That was a little weird because Hartman's not on Dallas. They just didn't sign him. But they've done a good job of increasing the value of players. Even Niskanen, like when they grabbed Niskanen, he was kind of looking like a player on his way out a little bit. And it looked more like a move to add some veteran leadership, but his value has gone way up. So what they're doing and what I think is helpful is with all these prospects in the system and having some of these players that have increased trade value over the last year or so, they could easily make a blockbuster trade in the offseason if they needed to. And, you know, the Flyers aren't afraid to spend to the cap. So you could, if you needed to, move somebody around. Like I think they would still like to add a top four, like a really like legitimate top four defenseman, which is everybody's, you know, desire, but it's not that easy in the NHL. So even a guy like Alex Pietrangelo, who was the Blues captain, he's up for free agency this year. Everyone is expecting him to sign. He just hasn't on the Blues, and who knows? Sometimes players like Tavares, no one thought Tavares was going to test free agency, and he's on the Leafs. And the year that Stamkos re-signed with Tampa, he still waited till the last day and took all those offers. So there's a chance that a guy like him might become available, and they have the depth and pieces that other teams want. They can move out salary if they needed to, and move out a forward or two and not miss a beat, you know. And that's really what you want. Like that's the strong level of development. Because I was even thinking today again, like I just had this thought. I'm like, oh yeah, Cam York just finished his freshman year at Michigan, right? And I'm like, and he, you know, he's only just turned 19 or whatever. So I'm checking up on him again, and I'm like, oh, he hasn't signed yet, which isn't uncommon. So does that mean he's going back? Yeah, he's going back again to Michigan next year. He's decided, which is again, so that's another year that they have a young prospect that's not on Lehigh. So he'll likely sign at the end of next year. So there's just this constant like guys coming in. So I just looked at the list, and there's like 2 or 3 other prospects. So like, yeah, they're probably not going to sign yet. They're going to wait another year, and you're like, well, that's another year that then 2 or 3 more will get inserted, you know? So It's incredible.
It really, it's incredible is a good word, man. And we didn't even touch on Nolan Patrick. Like this guy's just, you know, waiting in the wings. So hopefully he gets healthy, man. Like, do you expect if the NHL resumes, do you expect him to kind of be on that ice? And like, what do you expect from Nolan Patrick moving forward, dude?
Yeah, I think he was doing some training on the ice, but I'm hoping that there's just enough time that he will be ready. So as they said, like with this thing, it's these headaches they think was caused by like a concussion. It's like a post-concussion syndrome type of thing. Mm-hmm. And they're exercise induced. So I've had those. I had those in high school for like 6 months because I played hockey and got hit in the head too many times. And they are the worst because you can feel fine when you're like doing something like this. Like I feel normal. And then once your heart rate like starts to go up, then suddenly you just start getting this almost like front migraine behind the eyes. Things get blurry. You can't see straight. And you're just like, oh, you know, and it obviously affects your play, but also the likelihood of you getting another concussion playing hockey goes way up when you can't see straight. Mm-hmm. So that's like the frustration that he's in right now. And so I think like they're waiting for that to dissipate to the point where he's not saying they're mild, but they're gone. So I think that's what they're still waiting on. But I would say it's okay to be hopeful. Like, it's been long enough that I think it's been about 9 months. That usually these things, 6 to 9 months usually, in a player that young, because he's, early 20s, he's not had a whole bunch of concussions, and in his late 30s where a player might just call it. I think there's a good chance that there's enough healing that'll be there. The doctors will be like, yeah, you're good to go, which would be huge because that just gives him another piece. I mean, right now on the depth chart, he'd probably be on the 4th line to start with. Yeah.
A lot of reasons to be optimistic if you're a Flyers fan, man. And lastly, last question. A player the Flyers have not signed yet is Wyatt Ock. What's going on with this guy, and do you expect them to sign him, and what do you expect from him?
Yeah, I think for him the issue isn't whether or not he wants to sign with the Flyers. The great thing about the Flyers historically, and that's continuing, is they're a team that people want to play on. So that's especially prospects. There's not too many guys that are just like, I'm going to blow you off and sign with, I don't know, the Winnipeg Jets or something. Flyers being a historic franchise, Bobby Clarke era. I grew up in Canada respecting the Flyers. Like, I remember thinking like, man, if I ever made the NHL, if the Flyers picked me, I would be okay with that. And that's a pretty common sentiment that's continued, even if they haven't been great the last few years. And so in Philly, in Canada, everyone just thinks Philly is this like tough city that everyone just fights each other all the time. So there's like an extra level of respect for that. I think it's like these small Canadian login towns and bars that is just all of Philly, which I've been to Philly. It's not true, but it's a funny sentiment.
What is Canada doing without hockey right now, man?
They're all playing NHL 20 with me right now.
Oh, man. Wild times.
Yeah, but Kalynuk, yeah. So he's from I believe he's from Alberta. So the issue for him is not whether or not he wants to sign with the Flyers. He was a captain at Wisconsin this year, and Wisconsin just had a really rough year. They had all these really good young players. So like Cole Caulfield, who I secretly wanted the Flyers to take last year. He was on Wisconsin this year. Alex Turcotte, who was a top 5 pick last year from LA, he was on there. So on paper, if you looked at the Wisconsin team, they were young, but they were just stacked with all these young, really good players. And Kalynuk was one of the elder statesmen, and they just bombed. Like, they won almost no games this year. I watched a couple games online of them. I actually was planning before kind of all this happened to try to go to a game because I don't live too far from Madison, and just wanted to see these guys play. And just could not get it together. And so with Kalynuk, I think he was just really disappointed. I think that he thought they were going to make the big tournament, like the Frozen Four, as they call it, in the version of March Madness that the NHL, that the NCAA hockey does. And they didn't make it. So everything I've read, they just constantly say like, hey, he's just undecided. Like, he really wanted to have success. He's been on a rebuilding Wisconsin team. They haven't had it. He doesn't want to just leave things where they are. But it's the same thing. Like, Lozinski came back for his senior year last year. He signed. Wyatt Allison came back for their senior year. NHL teams just get a little squirmy now with the new collective bargaining because seniors, as I said before, so if you were drafted in the NCAA or before you're in the NCAA, after you play your senior year, you can become a free agent. I think it's like August 15th, and NHL teams lose their rights. So what happens is every NHL team at the end of a junior year, they don't care if they think you're going to be an NHL player definitively or not at that point, they're going to offer you a contract because they just don't want to lose your rights because they use that pick on you. And so that's what's happening right now. The Flyers are doing what every team does. They're like, hey, man, you should sign. And he's just undecided. And so it's a thing to keep an eye on. He'd be, again, another one of those guys that he would be in Lehigh next year and probably be good. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of a situation. And I think that pretty much covers the answer. I guess Gavin Hayne, that was another one they're trying to sign. He's played 2 years, but I think he's probably better to do one more year just because his offense is still developing. And but, yeah, there's Noah Cates is another one too. Like, I just think through these guys on my list, and I'm like, yeah, they didn't sign yet. So that's just another year when they do that they'll be in the system. So
awesome stuff. Make sure you follow Tyson Quibell on Twitter at Quibell Tyson, and check out the TNT podcast. Covers everything NHL and the Flyers. Man, thanks for joining, bro. Welcome back anytime.
Thanks. This has been great.
Love it. For Tyson, for myself, thanks for watching, guys. Stay awesome.
Sixers win it! Wow! Oh man, and being just posterized Russell Westbrook.
You love the Philadelphia Eagles. Let me get a hell